All right, let's get started. Ephesians chapter 5. This is a powerful scripture. We talked a little bit about this last week. And I want to go back through it just quickly because it's a nice synopsis, if you want to say. This is where we live. What this little section right here, Ephesians 5, verses 1 through 16, this is our culture. This is our environment. And really, it's kind of become the world's culture and the world's environment. When we talk about where we live now and we equate, all right, where are we at in the timeline of eternity? I think you can make a very solid case that we are what Jesus said it'll be like it was in the days of Noah. And our time is very much like the days of Noah. There are more and more people who are in opposition to God. Totally in opposition to God. There are people who are questioning whether or not they believe in God at all levels. At all levels. I had a conversation with some kids one time, and because the father in that home has questions, this teenage, middle teenage boy now, like his dad, having some questions. I don't know if I believe in God. Okay, well, you're sitting in my truck right now. You want to talk about it, So it was kind of interesting. And so Paul also talks about in those days, people have fallen away. So we see what's happening around us. So Ephesians brings this information to us, and it's very straight up. So Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1 says this, talking to Christians, be imitators of God as beloved children and walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us, an offering and sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. Verse 3, but immorality or any impurity or greed must not even be named among you, as is proper among the saints. And there must be no filthiness and silly talk or coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather fitting for a Christian is what it's saying, but rather giving thanks. For this you know with certainty, that no immoral or impure person or covetous person or who is an idolater has an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. So that's pretty straight up. You are either in, I am either in, we are either in, or we're not. But the dividing line is our morality, Are we in? Does the morality of Jesus Christ, is that a true transformation in our life? Is that really changing us? Is that, as I see on some church websites, is that a radical change? We believe in radical change. Does it look like that? Because if it doesn't, it's really not radical change, And so he goes on, he says, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. So he's saying, we either obedient and follow him, even though it's hard. And I want to tell you, it isn't always easy, right? We didn't always like the rules of the house we grew up in, did we? But we followed him, didn't we? Or there were ramifications. There were repercussions. There was days were not good if we decided to go rogue in that house.
Trouble sitting down?
That's right.
For sure.
So while it may not always be easy, what Paul is saying, it's a dividing line. Are you in? Because it's going to keep you separated from God if you're not. In other words, if you're walking this line that says, yeah, I'm all about the church, but I'm all about also doing my own thing, And my own thing probably doesn't look like the image of Jesus Christ. And there's tons of people, particularly in North America, will just pick on us, where the church is saying, it's okay, you can kind of, you can kind of do your own thing, which is what some people call cheap grace, if you want to put it that way.
I wonder when this became radical change.
This?
Yeah. Because I can remember a time when that's the way everyone acted.
Yeah.
When was the point where it was not everyday, normal reaction to announce a radical change?
I think it was in the late 60s. That was radical change. I know because my parents were appalled and angry and confused about what in the world was going on. Because there was, I know there was revival with the Jesus people, but there was also Haight-Ashbury.
Yep.
And free love.
Yep. We're going to talk about that very shortly. We're going to talk about the contrast of those two things here in about 5 minutes.
When Christians start looking like the world, then it's not radical change.
And we're going to talk about that in just a second too, because I think there was a defining time. I was thinking about this morning, going through, and I'm going, when this changed? Because Mike, I had the very same thought. I'll tell you when this changed. I think this changed in the early 80s. And I think it changed in the early 80s when Christianity became popularized and we all of a sudden had a mainstream spotlight on us with the moral majority. So hang on to that thought for a second. Let me finish this and we'll get into that. Verse 8, for you were formerly darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists of all goodness and righteousness and truth, trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. For it is disgraceful to even speak of things which are done in secret. And I just want to highlight verse 12 for a second, because we're going to talk about Ishtar tonight and some of the things that the demon Ishtar has brought to our culture are disgraceful. I mean, just like, I don't even want to talk about it, but I got to at least point it out, right? And I only want to point it out tonight. All these things that have happened, starting with the 60s, the sexual revolution and sex and drugs and rock and roll, all right? All of that happened. So we can identify it. Therefore, we know how to pray through it, over it, to ask God to, eliminate it in the influence in individual lives. And I think that's what we're going to have to do. Verse 13, but all things become visible when they are exposed by the light. And who's supposed to be the light? We're supposed to be the light. So for everything that becomes visible is light. For this reason it says, awake, sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time, because the days are evil. So I think that really sets us up with this, this is where we live. We live in an immoral, impure, greedy society, a society that is now come to this point, like Noah's day, where there is more opposition to God than there is pro-God.
Yes.
And even this article, I think, is interesting that there was 75 to 80% some negativity against that. All it's saying is, if you wanted to summarize, we believe that we all should be like children, that we try to get along. And there were people who felt that was an infringement. They were, so you go, I mean, I'm not going to sit here, I can sit here and criticize and go, what is all of that about? But I'm just going, all right, it just tells that's a litmus test. Where are we at? Well, I'll tell you where we're at. That tells you exactly where we're at. We're in a place where people are in opposition to God, and you have to say, okay, well, how did we get to that point? Well, Jonathan Cahn brings up in this book this dark trinity, and he talks about the dark trinity and how we got to this point. He brings up in here because the same influences in American culture were the influences in Israeli culture that brought them down. As they turned away from God, they became more and more intrigued and followed these gods and the influence of these gods, these demonic gods, and it brought them down. And what he's saying is that's exactly what's happening to America. So the dark trinity, he identifies as Baal, which talks about Baal in the Old Testament. It talks about Ishtar in the Old Testament, and then it talks about Molech. So Baal, Ishtar, and Molech are the three gods that Israel followed as they left the Word of God and turned to their own understanding. And as they turned to their own understanding, created their own rules and their own truth, if you want to put it in our mindset today, that's what they did. Well, it's okay, because we want what we want. So what he is saying is that the influences of those three demonic presence in our time too. So just to review, Baal is also known as Zeus and Jupiter. You see him with the lightning bolt and the bull. That is Baal. Ishtar is also identified as Ashtoreth in the Old Testament. Ina, Aphrodite, and Venus, the goddess of love. And I mean, there was great little 50s tunes about Venus. But, what's that?
And blue jeans.
And blue jeans, that's right. But the truth is, in that sense, Venus was evil because she turned her hearts away, and that's what we're going to look at tonight. So what Ephesians is saying, what this brings up, and what we see through the history of what happened to Israel, there is no in-between line. You can't be on both sides of the fence. We either have to be all in with God, or slow. If we're not, we might not get there immediately, but slowly but surely, we're going to get farther and farther away from him, and that's what happened there. So, you mentioned the 1960s. He brings up in this book, the 1960s, actually on page 78, he says, he identifies the moment that Ishtar came to America, he says. The goddess's entrance into America, we would expect biblical standards and ethics surrounding sexuality and marriage to begin to erode. We would expect the moral foundations and values that had undergirded Western civilization for nearly 2,000 years to begin to be overturned. In short, we would expect there to be a revolution in the realm of sexuality, a sexual revolution. And that's what happened in the 1960s. Is part of that whole, the hippie movement kind of thing. And all I remember is, I was way too young to be in it, but I remember hearing table talk about it and how, crazy it was, and people talking about it and seeing a little bit of it on the news. So he goes on here to say this. He said, that's exactly what took place. Shortly after America's turning from God began manifesting in the early 1960s, another transformation took place in the realm of sexuality. It would be one of the central defining moments of the 1960s, and it would continue long after the decade was over. It would not stop until it had transformed America and Western culture beyond recognition, which it has. And it's crazy to go back and watch some old movies from, the 40s, the 50s, and maybe some even in the early 60s. And you see, the lines and the lines that are delivered, and the storylines, and how it's like, wow. I mean, it's just totally different now, compared to the stories that are told. So, he said the effect that the goddess had on America could be summed up in 3 words: the sexual revolution. There had been another sexual revolution. It took place in ancient times in the Greco-Roman world. It was the revolution by which biblical sexual ethics, ideals, and morality replaced those of the pagan world. It happened at the same time the gods were cast out of Western civilization. He's talking about Rome. So if you've read the book, he takes you through, and as Christianity increased in the first century, it overwhelmed Rome, right? And Rome was a pagan culture. But as Christianity advanced, all of that paganism began to move to the sidelines, move to the corners. And he equates Rome as the first Western civilization because in a lot of ways, America was built on some of those premises that the Roman culture was. And so with that, he's saying the West, as it embraced Christianity, all of that paganism, all of that idol worship was set to the corners. It never really went away, and even if, and I don't know, but I mean, I think, there was, in every grocery store, there was a little IGA store. Well, there was a magazine rack, right? You don't have magazine racks anymore, but there was magazines that they kept covered, right?
Yeah.
And they were up high, so and so in the corner, right, there was stuff that wasn't for prime time, but it was still around. So we didn't eliminate that stuff. It was kind of still around. But he's saying in the first century, Christianity, and as the centuries advanced, all of that stuff finally went away. Well, America now, somehow or other, what happened? Somehow or another, America let that stuff back in. And it has influenced America and all of Western culture. So what he's saying here The casting out of the gods included the casting out of Roman Venus, the Greek Aphrodite, the Phoenician Ashtar, and the Mesopotamian Ishtar. All the varied manifestations of the goddess of sexuality. It was in the goddess's departure that biblical values replaced pagan ones at the first and the first sexual revolution took place, and he's saying that would be as Christianity advanced. Okay, so let's pick up what you guys were talking about, because I was thinking about this morning, and it hit me that in the 1960s is when this all started, this sexual revolution and this attack on marriage and this free love and the use of drugs and all that. So it was through the 60s, and then you get to 1969. And we see the Jesus revolution, that revival that was so powerful, it actually impacted the entire country, the United States. It started in California and moved across the United States. And it influenced that entire decade of the 1970s. So I've mentioned this before, and I've thought about this. I'm going, that's what happened. So my coming of consciousness, and probably your coming of consciousness in the late 60s and early 70s, as church people, okay? As church people, we saw people coming to church. They were moved by something to come to church. And churches, at least the church I grew up in, was a big church. And there was people coming to church all the time. And there were other churches, people came to church. So that started, and when you look at how that revival impacted culture, it impacted the movies, it impacted Broadway, because there was Godspell. Mm-hmm. And was there another one? Jesus Christ Superstar. So you had that. You look at the top 40 songs of the time. It impacted music. It impacted television. There were even on television, as people would come together and they'd have a family meal in whatever TV show, and they would bow their heads and pray. The Waltons, even in a Twilight Zone episode, I've seen several Twilight Zone episodes that reference Jesus Christ, that reference the Bible, and reference the Bible in that program as being the basis of morality. So even in that show, which was very edgy for its time, and now you look at it and go, that was well written, because we're living there now. So you see all that. You see the influence that the church and the word had on people. Then you get to 1969, and you had this rise. And through the 1970s, you had this movement, and it was rising and rising. So I got to thinking, when did that end? And I heard somebody and I can't remember who it was, but I was watching a YouTube video, and I can't remember, Alan, maybe you sent it to me. Anyway, this guy was talking, and he said, when it seems like the Spirit quit moving was in 1983. He didn't define why. He just said it seemed to him in his recollection, he's our age, in his 60s. He said it was about 1983 that you saw that movement kind of end. And I'm thinking, so I was thinking about this morning early, and I'm going, what was going on in 83? And it occurred, I don't know if I'm right, I'm just saying what occurred to me was the moral majority is what happened early then, because Christianity and church didn't necessarily have a political platform until that 1980 election. Okay? Just hear me out. So all of a sudden now you've got the moral majority that's impacting this 1980 election. And there's a rise there, and people are going, yes, he's speaking for me, I'm not taking a political side. I'm just saying, at least in my lifetime, that was the first time Christianity and the church really had this platform. Well, I think what happened is that we got jacked up on the fame. This is my theory. We got jacked up on the fame, and it was in 83, in that period of time, that you stopped seeing about how to disciple people, and you had this thing called the church growth movement. It was right in there. Yeah. What's the difference between discipleship and the church growth movement?
It's not about the individual and the kingdom. It's about their interpretation of church. And I think you're right. You see it all over. It's not about growing the kingdom. It's how big of a facility can we build? You know, how big can we get to impress people or to draw people in? And so yeah, there's a lot of church growth that you saw. Falwell and Swaggart and all of them building large churches and congregations through that time period.
Yep.
So it's
Add to that platform, now you have cable television. With cable television, you have the PTL Club. You have Christian television networks now that come up. And all of a sudden, bigger is better. And you have notoriety. You have celebrity.
Yep.
I think that, to me, there was a dividing line right there. I think if you want to mark in time, and there would be people who would debate me on that, and that's fine. I'm not saying I'd fall on my sword on this, but I'm just saying, to me, thinking back over it, that was the mark. That was when, and it became more about the celebrityness of the kingdom, or the celebrity of the pastor, or how big your church was, that became the essence of whether or not you were growing, versus how many disciples are you making? How many lives have you changed?
Yes.
Now, that wasn't across the board, because there's always hot pockets, right? There's always hot pockets where the kingdom is expressed well and disciples are being made. But I think that was the difference to me.
well, I think that was a time period where they realized how much money could be made through religion.
I was gonna say most of these preachers had feet of clay.
Well put.
They really cast doubts on Christianity.
And
The
what
people
was that?
who were on the fence. A lot of these preachers didn't live up to what they were preaching,
Oh yeah.
and they cast doubts on people who were marginal or on the fence or thinking about it, and then I see what this is. When they were very sinful, as everyone is, but they were held up to be celebrities.
Yeah, I think it's a dangerous thing.
Jerry Falwell.
Yes. And Proverbs says, the crucible is for silver and the furnace is for gold, but a man is tested by the praise given to him.
Yeah.
And it's like, you get celebrity,
Ooh.
and it's like, can you handle it?
Yeah.
Jim Baker,
Ah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Tammy Baker.
Yeah.
I forgot about him.
Their ministry fell apart. They had this big amusement park or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah,
And
campground, everything.
Jimmy Swaggart was involved with a prostitute. He fell away.
Mm-hmm.
He's back now, but and you had Oral Roberts saying, "Give me money or God's going to kill me."
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
That was,
Really?
I forgot
who was
about
the guy
that.
that kept driving around the mountain and he couldn't stop until he had so much money because God told him he couldn't quit until he, somewhere out in,
Oh my goodness.
out east, south, east. I saw that on TV and I'm like, that's just, God won't let you quit until there's so much money. Had to drive
Yeah.
night and day. It was awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had the Crystal Palace with Frank Sinatra singing "I Did It My Way."
Oh yeah. That's hysterical.
Oh man.
They were
But you know,
peddling money for people that didn't have it though.
Yeah.
That's
That's
what was
right.
sad.
That's right.
It got to be about how many people did we have, numbers, rather than
Right.
how's Ray doing spiritually?
Yes.
Is he growing?
Yep.
Is he backsliding? What's he doing? Can we help him? That kind of talk just kind of went out the window. Was he here? Yeah, he was here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, everything was focused on how big of a congregation can we get?
Yeah.
And buildings.
How
big
large
buildings.
a congregation
Yeah.
can we get?
Mm-hmm.
Then it was, how big of a facility can we fill with this congregation so that they look good on camera? And, went into the TV aspect of it. And I've said this before, I think it's a disease that breeds upon itself.
Yep.
Yeah.
because they get to a certain level and they've got all of these other people that are tagging along, being paid out of what they bring in, and they're saying, oh, I got to remain popular. I've got all these people depending upon me, so I have to keep doing this.
Mhm.
And it just,
Disease called pride.
Yeah. And please don't take me wrong. I think the original intent probably was correct,
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but it sucked you in, whatever. Or the other thing I thought is that in order to either maintain or for whatever reason, when the purity of the word in that preaching, when that was diminished somehow, we opened the door for this alternate influence, these alternate influences. And that's the same thing that happened with Israel. And I think if you look at this, I think their intention was good from the get-go.
Yeah.
But somehow or other.
Well, and just look at the sons of Aaron and the sons of Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
That's so sad.
Things were going great.
Mm-hmm.
And the sons of Aaron and the sons of Samuel, we can see the same things that are happening within the common current situation of pastors, evangelists, whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And,
We haven't learned.
no.
Well,
And that's why another reason we're like Israel.
Yeah.
So think about this contrast. So you've got the 1960s that's bringing in this sexual revolution. It's attacking marriage. It's attacking morality. And you've got the power of a true revival in our time that begins maybe to push that back. Although I don't know. I just know lives were changed during that time. That 10-year period of the 70s, people came to Christ. But at the same time, you listen to all of the music of the 70s, and you look at all of the entertainment of the 70s. I mean, there was stuff happening that we didn't push it back to the corners, so to speak, right? So he brings up this aspect of the new morality. You remember that term? And I think that was birthed out of maybe the 70s or maybe more like the 80s. The new morality, enlightened thinking, free thinkers. Free thinkers came out of the 60s. And maybe even to the 50s if you want to push that envelope a little bit. So what he's saying is that Ishtar, this influence of this demonic goddess is Ishtar, the sexual revolution was another dimension of the paganization of America and Western civilization. So what did it use? It used the sexual revolution to paganize America. How did that do that? How did she do that? The values it represented were pagan values, and sexuality was a pagan sexuality. What was branded as new morality was actually an old morality, an ancient morality, the morality of the gods. The reappearance of that morality was a sign that departed spirits had come back to the house. The aim of the goddess was to destroy the morality and the faith by which she was expelled. To do that, she would have to take a Christian nation and civilization with regard to sexuality and marriage, upheld biblical morality and practices, and lead it into embracing pagan morality and pagan practices. How to do that? As with the return of Baal, she would have to work incrementally, step by step, and progressively. But it was the spirit of Ishtar. And to Ishtar especially belonged the powers of seduction and spells. So recasting her ancient spells, she would begin the seduction of America and the modern world. You see the timeline? I mean, he paints a wonderful picture of the timeline of when that came in and what really happened, through the 60s and that changeover. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. You look back and you can see it. And I think, why didn't I see it?
Yeah.
I was caught up in it too.
Yeah.
Well, and when all of that was happening during the 60s, there was also that faction of Christians that was pushing it away because it didn't fit with their norm.
Gosh,
It didn't fit with what they saw as religion.
Yeah.
The grandparents really did
which
not like
it
that.
means it
Yeah.
didn't fit their tradition.
Yes.
It had everything to do with religion. It didn't have anything to do with their tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
You know,
Al?
James 4:8 says, "Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you." As you drift away from God, and God is not your focus, and the Holy Spirit is not leading in direction. You can go back to Proverbs 16:25. There's a way which seemeth right to a man, but the
Mhm.
ends thereof are death. You know, people start making, I'm going to build a big enjoyment park or whatever built Jim Baker and Tammy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oral Roberts. I mean, they've built all of this stuff, and they've just drifted away from God.
Yeah.
And what they thought, you know, was right, it didn't balance with what God, the direction that God would have had.
Lost in all that. Go make disciples.
Yeah.
Mm.
right.
Yes.
Lost in all of that was this discipleship piece of it.
Well, and God said, don't worry about your church. Build my kingdom.
Yeah.
I'll take care of the church.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But we in America seem to know better than anyone else, so we go, no, we're going to build a church.
Yeah.
And we see all these cathedrals and all these large facilities, and we're still seeing them built.
Yeah.
People, wanting to build a church. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine today. His son is, getting ready to ask this young girl to marry him, and they're going to go to New York, and she's from a very religious family, and they're wanting to plant a church, and I just going through my mind, says, why they want to go plant a church? Why don't they go build disciples? Why don't they? It's not about the church.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of Americans think it's about the church.
We embraced a business model.
Yes.
By and large, through that mid and later part of the 20th century, I think if you want to, and again, right, like Ray, you're saying, why did I see that then? We didn't. But it seemed like that was a business model that is based on, we hire a good pastor who's also a good manager, and a good manager will help the business grow, kind of thing. And it was kind of,
Well,
that's a maybe oversimplified, but I think that was kind of the mindset a little bit.
we only see those things when we have turmoil.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything was going good. People were coming to church. You had good populations in church. Everything was working in the church.
Yeah.
You come in and pat everybody on the back on Sunday and Wednesday night and Saturday night. And as things start moving away from that, I started to say deteriorating, but I don't know if that's the right word. But as things start diminishing, the amount of time that we are in a church building. When I grew up, you had Saturday night church, you had Sunday morning, Sunday night church, you had Wednesday night. And usually Tuesday or Thursday night, there was a Bible study.
Yeah.
There was, that was the social aspect.
Right.
When you're raised in a town or near a town of only 300 people,
Yes.
that's your social aspect other than, sitting in front of the gas station and watch cars go by. So, but I think at, those time frames, we hadn't gotten to the point of, let's say, social exploration like we see now.
Mm-hmm.
And we were focused on our little town, our family, our church. The town I grew up, we had 4 churches. We had the Methodist, the Baptist, the Christian, and the Apostolic. And most towns around there had those same churches.
All these little towns, how many churches?
Each little town usually had those 4 churches.
Yeah.
And now they don't.
Now they don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Lord keeps bringing me back to pick up your cross and follow me. And
Right.
I think as individuals, we let that go.
Mhm.
Collectively, okay, yeah. But for me to pick up my cross and follow, that's, I don't know.
Why is that hard?
Yeah, why is that hard? And the Lord keeps pounding that in my head, so I'm working on it.
But
But the Christian establishment has not been pounding that in our heads.
Right.
no.
You know, they're saying, let me carry your cross.
Yes.
I'll take care of this for you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But there's still a place for the church.
Oh,
Oh,
always be a
always,
place for the
always.
church. The church, understand, the church is the only institution God is going to flow everything He's ever going to do into a culture. It's flowing through. So who is the church? We are the church,
We
right?
are the church.
Now, we are blessed with building and facility from which then we can outflow a whole variety of things. And it's not that the things that have been done are wrong. I don't think that the things that we've done in these giant buildings and giant expressions of the faith are wrong. But the question is, how did we get from there where it was hot to here where it's not?
Mm-hmm.
And I think how we got to that point is maybe we were too busy doing those things that we forgot to pick up the cross and follow Him. Maybe we were too busy doing those things to think, am I really helping that person? Am I encouraging that person? Am I just doing things? I think sometimes, even in the first century, Mary and Martha, you know, look at that story, you know, and Jesus saying, Martha, settle down. The kitchen take care of itself. Mary's got the right perspective here, you know, and so perhaps it's in that sense. But I just, you know, the question is, how did we go from that to this, you know, and seemingly in our lifetime, you look back 50 years and you go, gosh, it wasn't a long time at all. But, you know, when in 1972, if you were to think backwards 50 years to a time you weren't born, you go, man, that was ancient. 1922 was ancient. And you talk to a 10-year-old today and go, 1972? That must have been ancient. Did you have electricity then? You know? So we look at this and we think, it wasn't that long ago, but man, it kind of was, you know, in every sense of the way. And all that time, Satan has continued to try to take control. And it's just methodical, if you want to look at it that way. One thing at a time, one person at a time, one habit at a time that he takes over, you know. And it's in the, and you know, there is a lot of good work that still is done. You know, we're talking in an overview right now, you know, in this sense. But it's in the overview that we've lost it. You know, it's the overview that has allowed us to elect leaders who say it's okay to kill babies. You know, it's somewhere in there and that fight. I mean, that's been a long fight, and we actually won a battle. You know, we overturned, and Khan talks about that. That we overturned what happened 50 years ago, last year. But the battle's not over because Satan's not going to give up. So church then is very necessary because God is only going to fight darkness through His institution, the church. Therefore, the impetus for us as individuals to not let immorality rule in our life is going to be the power of the church. And for us to say, I'm not going to let immorality rule in my life, is picking up my cross and saying, man, I really want that cookie, but I'm not going to do it. God, you got to help me not want that cookie, you know. And I think that is somewhere, Carla, where we've kind of lost that, either through soft gospel or soft preaching, or you know, misusing grace. I'll put it that way. I think grace maybe has been misused in a great way to justify keeping my cross. I'm not going to pick it up. I'm going to leave it right where it's at because I don't want to give up this cookie. Yeah.
Carla gave us two examples. She had visited a small church down south that was really crazy. She also visited a big church. I would hope it wasn't the same, or isn't the same with all big churches. But could you revisit that?
Which one? The little church? Well, the small church that was definitely spirit filled, you could feel it when you walked, and it was in the midst of devastation. These people had lost everything, and still they had a lot of joy in their hearts. And I don't know, did I mention the big church when I went to New York?
Yeah.
And how cold, and it was desolate, even though it was packed. And the message was, you be you and I'll be me. And is that the one you're talking about?
I think the big church moved down south somewhere.
Oh,
In both instances.
Where they had valet parking
Yeah.
and stuff.
Oh, cool.
And 4 different services. It was a monster building. And, you know, they valet parked and gave you a ticket because your car was going to be so far away. And it was an entire day to get your car back, practically. But it was so overwhelming. It was like going to the assembly hall.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no fellowship. Maybe they had fellowship in pockets, but during the service, you know, there really was no fellowship there, which I was amazed, because this church obviously had a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money. The seats were recliners almost, and I don't know. That was in where was I? Tennessee, somewhere in Tennessee, at a horse show. And those horse show people, you didn't start early Sunday, because everybody, what church do you want to go to, and do you need a ride? It was just understood we were going to church.
Nice.
You know, and even some of the people that were with us that were very anti-church went.
Yeah.
You know, which I thought was pretty amazing. But it was, and they were very impressed with this big, beautiful church with the valet parking, and you know, all of the ushers dressed alike. I thought that was phenomenal. And it was an army. But still, I have fond memories of that little church in Mississippi. That's where the Spirit was. That's where, you know, the Lord was doing some pretty fantastic things.
That's cool. Anybody else? I'm going to shift gears here slightly on you. So let's summarize something here as we move forward. It seems that we have gotten to where we are at collectively, because collectively we have, as the church, as God's representatives in our culture, in our time, we have de-emphasized the full Word of God and some of the basic things like deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Like some of the basic things, go into all the world and make disciples. Teach these disciples my commands, all that I've commanded you. And remember, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth, you know. So I think we've lost that. So as we've lost that, that has given the devil one little crack to get in, one little crack to get in, one little crack to get in. And if you, over time, leave a crack untended, it gets bigger, right? So Ishtar, being riding behind Baal, now has used the sexual revolution to break down a lot of morality in America. Okay, to the point. I understand stuff, but to the point where even now, divorce, you know, in 2023, divorce of church people is as high, and maybe slightly higher, depending on the study you read, as it is in unchurched people. So, here's what he says. He talks about the attack of marriage, and I think that is spot on, because this is what we're seeing. And I want to bring this up because every young married couple you know is under spiritual attack right now. Every single one of them. If there are kids in that house, every single child is under attack by the enemy, who wants to detach them from their connection to Almighty God through Jesus Christ. That is what's happening right now. Okay, so let's look at this. God's view of marriage is that one man, one woman, and they come together in a covenant to rule together. That's in Genesis. He says in America and Western culture in the mid-20th century, sexuality was seen as the sacred domain of marriage, and marriage as the sacred and lifelong covenant of love between a husband and a wife. These values were largely the same as they had been in ancient times with the coming of Christianity. Sex outside of marriage, whether premarital or extramarital, was seen as sin. Divorce was frowned upon. If a woman became pregnant before marriage, she and the child's father were expected to marry. The divorce rate was minuscule, and that's true. Even in the early 1960s, it was what, less than 2 or 3%. Certainly less than 5%, as I recall. All right. So the percentage of people living together outside of marriage, as was the rate of children born out of wedlock, was super low. Do you know what the out of wedlock, the unborn children percentage is right now? I heard today on the radio. 72%. 72% of children born today are born in a situation where the father and mother are not married.
Or together.
Or together. Yeah, or together. So that tells you where we're at. Prostitution existed back then, but it was illegal and confined to the underworld. Pornography was taboo too, and for the most part kept out of the mainstream culture and public view. Even those who broke such standards would, for the most part, keep their behavior private. American entertainment and popular culture were expected to uphold the same values. Beyond illusion and suggestion, sexual relations were generally not depicted on the movie screen. Lucy and Ricky had separate beds. I'll just put it there, right? You know, Lucy and Ricky did not sleep in the same bed.
Dick Van Dyke.
Yeah. Yeah, Rob and Laura Petrie didn't either,
Yeah.
right? So, So Hollywood was expected to follow an agreed upon code of morality as to what could and could not be shown. Nudity of any kind was forbidden. Any allusion to sex outside of marriage would not be portrayed in a positive light. And for television screens, the parameters were even tighter. And then came Ishtar. We've seen the dynamic of deification. When an individual or a nation or a civilization turns away from God, that which is not God will become God.
Yes.
Right? When a nation, individual, nation, or civilization turns away from God, that which is not God will become God and will assume the aura of godhood. One of those things that are not God is sex. When Israel turned away from God, sex, in the form of the goddess Ashtoreth or Ishtar, was deified. Sex became a god. Sex thus became an end and a goal to be pursued in and of itself. Therefore, it could now be divorced from marriage or any other context and be followed with no regard for the context of any other thing. When the spirit of Ishtar came to America, the same dynamic began to replay. Sexuality was deified. It became a god to be pursued as an end and of itself and without regard to marriage, love, or even relationship. That which was once an exclusive domain of a husband and wife now spilled into the public sphere and popular culture, and so began the progressive severing of sexuality from marriage. As Israel worshipped and served the goddess of sexuality, so now America, indwelled by the same spirit and the same goddess, became increasingly obsessed with sex. And so then marriage became under attack. The effect of Ishtar's return to the modern world was the progressive undermining and weakening of marriage. As sexuality was glorified as an end in and of itself, marriage was eroded. As Ishtar had pursued relationship after relationship, so America began doing the same. As the taboo against ending one's marriage began to end, so did marriages. Under the spirit of Ishtar, divorce became an epidemic, and America was filled with broken homes.
I just read an article a couple of days ago where California is considering making prostitution legal.
So they can tax it.
It doesn't surprise
Whatever.
me. Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
And whatever California does, Illinois does. Have you noticed
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. 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 But that is true. I mean, marriages are completely under attack. And more so, either it got on my radar a year ago, or I just feel like something shifted a year ago. And I remember telling y'all, I just felt like last spring, right at Easter, something felt to me just shifted. And it's not been the same since. And when you look at, it really is an epidemic.
It is.
I think it's going to be hard to reach these children who have no concept of any kind of normal family, because they're with their mom or their dad, and they've been married, so and they've got all these brothers and sisters that are half brothers and sisters, and it's just it's hard.
And it's not their fault.
Oh, of
right?
course it's not their fault, but I'm just thinking how in order to reach them.
Yeah.
It's going to be very difficult.
So what they don't have that maybe others have had, and maybe not, and that might not even be everybody in our time, in our generation, but they don't have that normal stability. Right? Everything's kind of on a shifting sand.
And it's liable to change at any moment.
Yeah.
Because this, you would see them in the emergency room all the time. And and your mom, that's not my mom. And then, okay, you're trying to figure out who is the parent in this situation so you can treat this child.
Mm-hmm.
And then the children will tell you, like, oh, I don't know who my dad is, we don't know where he is, and,
right.
My mom, that's not my dad, my mom's not married to that creature, You just feel so sorry for them because those kids are lost.
Yeah.
And stability is the right word, they have none.
Yeah.
No security.
Right.
They don't know where they're going to be.
And there's not much light in those homes.
Oh, no.
Right? It's a lot of darkness.
It makes you want to control the kids' schooling. You make it like homeschooling,
Yeah.
but they're even talking about controlling what can be taught in homeschooling.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's no end to it.
They've been
Right.
trying to do that for quite a while.
Yeah.
And trying to outlaw homeschooling.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, they've been doing that for 30 years.
Yeah.
So, but think about this too, and here's where the church has got to step up. And by the church, I'm saying us as individuals.
Yeah.
I mean, institutions and buildings cannot do this. Only we as individuals representing the light of Jesus Christ. Heard this stat on the radio today on a national level. It's true in Piatt County. The stat is true in Piatt County. 30% of teenagers have thought about suicide.
Well,
in Piatt County.
and you wonder how many of those are the kids like I was talking about.
Yeah.
That don't really have any.
There's no stability, there's no hope. So the stat nationally, they were just talking about teenage girls. 30% of teenage girls nationally have thought about suicide and consider that as an option because there's no stability in their life. And part of what plays into that, and I was convinced of this before I heard this today, is social media. They see, I heard it put this way, and I thought it was really great, it's a highlight reel. Because you only put the good stuff on social media. And when you're a kid, you go, everybody's life is great except mine.
Right.
I mean, even if your life is great, you can be the captain of the football team and you think everybody else's life is great except yours sometimes. So, because you don't only have that perspective, you've got 15, 16 years of perspective and it's all about, that. And so these kids are dealing with this. So, what does the church have? The church has light that we have to shine into, but you can't do that. Your flashlight will only go so far. Even the best mag light you have, a 4D cell magnite, will shine down the road, but it only shines so far. You got to get up close, right? I've got to get up close and to influence those kids and influence these broken homes, these moms and dads that their lives are upside down too. I'm saying this, and I've said this I've said this to Travis, I've said this to other people in our denomination, but particularly within our Midwest region. I said, if the church can't help save a marriage from divorce, I'm not sure what good we are. And I mean that.
Yeah.
I don't mean it in a negative way, and I'm not discounting anything of the gospel. I'm saying if we can't step up and help somebody stop that, I'm not sure what we can do. And if that needs more definition, tell me, because I don't want to leave you thinking I'm weak on the power of the church. I'm just saying that is such a prevalent thing. And it's like, we've got to be able to step in, but you can't do it. I can't do it up here. I can say it up here, and the words become meaningless 10 minutes later because they can't remember what I said.
It comes back to discipling, like you said before. If that isn't a ground base, if that isn't established to begin with, it's hard to jump in the middle of something and change it.
Yes.
You know,
Oh gosh, yeah.
it's just difficult.
But that I use divorce as the first thing. It's true about suicide,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I understand there's so many things that play into this. There's the social stuff, there's the physical stuff, there's stuff there. I mean, there's depression, there's all kinds of stuff playing into this. All I'm saying is that you get 500 people in this building, and I could talk to them for 20 minutes, and they're going to walk out of here and go, I'm not sure that helped me at all.
Yeah.
I'm serious.
Yes.
But what will help, hopefully, is spending time with somebody. Hey,
Yes.
you want to go out for coffee? Can I come
Yes.
over? Can we talk? You want to come over and help me? You want to help me crawl under my truck? You know? I mean, I think that is the only way that we shine light. Yeah.
Once we let it go so far, it's like somebody really considering suicide, and you jump in and try and tell them about the joy of the Lord. They have no idea what
Right.
you're talking
Well,
about. They
they're-
can't even conceive of it, what it is, or
They
what it's
can't.
like.
Right.
You don't know.
Right, exactly.
yeah,
So it's like the church as a whole has lost it.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Right.
All right, now we see what's happened. To jump back in and correct it is tough.
Yeah.
You have to start, well, the children of today.
Yeah.
If-
Find some little child. Hang on, I'll
Little
get to you.
ones.
But it's like you said, we got to do individually and build relationships.
Yes. And then tell that little child, you're so smart. That is so
Yeah,
clever.
Exactly.
You guys are so creative. Right? They want to hear that from you.
You bet.
Need to hear it.
Yeah.
Need to hear it.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just gonna say, I was just gonna agree. It needs to be when they're little,
Yeah.
because I don't know how many times it was weekly that you would, use a stomach tube and save some little girl who took all the pills she could find, and you'd see them again, and it's horrific to have that. It's a monster tube, and you shove it down their throat,
Mm-hmm.
and pump their stomach, and a lot cold water in, cold water out. That's cramps, miserable, horrible, and they do it again. And there was this one girl, we probably saw her 4 times before she finally did it.
Oh.
And you're not supposed to say anything. You're supposed to call in the social worker. They haven't got anything.
Mm-hmm.
The social workers that I've been around, they really they don't have a lot of hope to give these kids.
Well, unless they can get close, that's just that's no different than standing up here and here.
It isn't.
I think
It isn't, but you would just feel so helpless because the social worker's going to sit in there for 20 minutes. It's not going to do a darn bit of good.
Yeah.
So, when you try to talk to them and this is miserable. You don't want to do this, and you'd see them again. It's heartbreaking, but you get really good at your skill because you get to practice all the time. But you know what? We said that when I retired, and we were talking about different procedures we've done. Never done that to a boy, a teenage boy.
Really?
All teenage girls.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
heard that on the news today. I didn't realize that.
It's well, because boys succeed.
Yes.
They use more violent methods than
Okay.
pills usually. Or if they do take pills, they go out in the middle of nowhere where no one will ever find them.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
There's a young lady who's currently addressing some committees in Congress about the issues of what she feels is the different social media sites that affected her, and it affected her what she felt was her self-worth, her ability to cope, always being bombarded with you don't look pretty enough, you don't eat the
Skinny
right
enough.
things, you don't dress the right things.
Mhm.
You're just, she was constantly being bombarded by all these, which just beat you down.
Right.
No matter how strong you are, you hear it enough, it beats you down.
Right.
And so that is one light that's shining out there that they're, now whether our individuals in Congress or within the State House, wherever, will, take heed to that, I don't know. Probably not, because I think they're too removed from today's generation.
Yeah.
Because most of them have been there for multiple generations, and
Way too long.
Yes.
Well, and what that does is, anorexia was such a problem before social media, and now it's a tremendously horrific problem, because these girls have to be skinny, and they get bulimic and anorexic, and
Steve,